Bible in chronological order backwards, and I recognized as I started to do that here in these books that it may really be confusing, and so I want to try to help bridge that gap of confusion here. Looking at them backwards, it looks like the Israelites built the walls, then the temple, and then the altar. But actually, because we're going backwards, they actually built the altar first, then the temple, and then the walls. And so it's very, very important that you understand they had their priorities correct. Not only that, but I think it's important to recognize that the men that were involved in this were extremely zealous for the Lord. And we see that they had the support of two Persian kings, at least most of the support for the two Persian kings. Now, there were four Persian kings during this period. However, only two of them are mentioned. And so we're going to take a look at this timeline once again so that we can try to keep these events in the correct chronological order, even though we're going backwards with our chronology. And so let's take a look at that timeline. So remember, we're doing a countdown to the birth of Christ. And so instead of counting up in numbers like we do now, we're counting down in numbers to 0 or to the birth of Christ. And so for clarification of the timeline, we have Cyrus, the king of Persia, in 538, allowing the first of the Israelites to return, 49,000 of them. And then Darius in 521, letting the second group return, and that's only 1,754 people returning. And so we need to understand that this was over a period of time, and we have the books in order of the chronological events: Ezra, Haggai, Jeremiah, Esther, Nehemiah, and Malachi. That's the correct historical sequence, counting down to the birth of Christ. Now, there's a couple things that I probably should have mentioned that are important here. One is that there were more than 1 million people, maybe some as high as 2 million people that were taken into captivity, but only 50,000 in both of the returns returned to the land. They'd become comfortable in Babylon. They'd become comfortable with the culture of Babylon. And now they weren't in any hurry to go back to a destroyed city and destroyed temple and destroyed walls. So as we look at this timeline, we need to understand the time that's going on here in the sequence. Again, remember, they built the altar first, then they built the temple, then they built the walls, and now there's going to be a spiritual awakening. But remember, in less than 100 years, the nation of Israel had gone from rebuilding the temple and doing what they needed to do with the altar and the walls, but they had gone back to carelessness and to backsliding away from spiritual things. So Zerubbabel went back to ashes and ruins and tried to rebuild. And Nehemiah wept over the city. And Ezra, what about Ezra? What kind of person was he? Let's take a look at just a couple of scriptures and think about the kind of man that Ezra was. This Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given, and the king granted him all of the requests because the hand of the Lord of his God was upon him. And then it says, for the first of the first month, he began to go up to Babylon, and on the first and the fifth of the month, he came to Jerusalem because the hand of God was upon him. For Ezra had set his heart to study the law of the Lord and practice it and teach his statutes and ordinances to Israel. He says, blessed be the Lord, the God of our fathers, who has put such things as this in the king's heart to adorn the house of the Lord, which is in Jerusalem. So here's the bottom line. These were godly men. These were men who God had his hand on them. Wouldn't it be wonderful at the end of our lives if people could say about us, God had his hand on those people, had his hand on me, had his hand on you, and that we want to remember, as particularly we're studying this section tonight, that God's on his throne. He put it in the heart of kings to give jewels and valuables for the rebuilding of the temple. He put it on their heart to put the people back into the land. And he put it on the heart of these men to rebuild the city, starting with the altar and then rebuilding the temple and finally the walls. God's on his throne. He knows what he can do. And in spite of all of the virus and everything else that's going around, God will rebuild our nation, especially those that believe in him, because God has his hand on an awful lot of people that are in this world today. And I hope that you enjoyed your worship services for those of you that had church this past Sunday. And for those of you that are going to have church this coming Sunday, I hope that you enjoy being able to get back inside the walls of the sanctuary and being able to worship corporately with the other believers. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.